Hi, everyone. This is Veronica from So It Seems, and welcome to my very first podcast. I'm so excited to spend some time with you, and I'm glad you've taken time out of your day and your schedule to spend it with me. I have a lot of different things that I'd like to talk to you about. I have a lot of different interests. My main business is sewing and quilting, but I also have a lot of hobbies on the side. Namely, I enjoy knitting. That is my main hobby that I am currently involved in. But I also enjoy doing other yarn and needlework type crafts. I also enjoy reading. I aspire to be a writer, but I haven't done a whole lot of that lately. I hope to be able to get into that soon. This podcast is just a chance to be able to share with you things that are going on in my life, the things that I'm involved with, and hopefully get to know you a little bit through comments or messages while you get to know who I am and the things that are going on in my life. While my interests are varied and I have a wide slew of them, I'm going to try to keep each episode of my podcast focused on just one aspect of it. It can be kind of confusing, I think, if there's too many different things that I'm talking about, and maybe you're just not interested in everything that I am, and you can probably just skip through the things that don't interest you. But who knows? Maybe if you stick around and you hear about something that is completely new to you, then you might have an interest sparked to check it out further or ask more questions. Today, the main thing that I have that I'm working on right now is a knitting project. Recently, I discovered a podcast called Grocery Girls, and they focus on knitting for the most part. There are a couple of sisters, and they talk about many different knitting projects. One of them does do some crochet, and she also does sewing of different types of bags. But mostly their interest is in knitting and the different yarns. They also have a group on Ravelry that I started to follow. And the beginning of 2020, they started a sock bash. Basically, the idea is that you would try to use up some of your sock yarn and make socks. They have it running all year long with the idea of making a pair of socks each month. Then each month there's also a theme. So you can follow the theme or you can just make a pair of socks. It is a contest. So following the theme for the month, you get kind of a double entry. So this month I decided to try my hand at making a pair of socks and following their theme. I chose a pattern and I have a copy of it here. Let me get the picture of it up. I apologize that the picture is just a black and white photocopy, but that is what I printed off from my printer. So this pattern is called Spotty Socks. You can see the title right up there. Spotty Socks. It's put out by Paint Box Yarns, and the designer is Jane Burns. You can't really see in the photo as well because it is a black and white, but the socks are what's called a mosaic, where it's just two different colors of yarn. Of course, it's put out by the company Paint Box Yarns with the idea that you would use their yarn. I don't always have the luxury of being able to buy all the yarn that I'd like to, but I was gifted a bunch of yarn. So I am using my own yarn. This yarn has a gray base, and then it has a variegated colored pattern for the second yarn. And it's called a mosaic because there are slip stitches throughout the pattern. So the yarn that I'm using, one, these two skeins were gifted to me by someone who had a friend that owned a yarn shop, and then apparently she closed it down and gave this person just tons of yarn. This gal knows that I love to make socks. I have made several pairs. I don't do it regularly because knitting is not my main hobby or my main craft that I work on. Um, but currently, it has been kind of my go-to relax or take along with me project. And I like being able to have those kind of things to work on because you just never know when you're going to end up sitting somewhere waiting and waiting and waiting for something to happen. So my first yarn is this brown. I'm not sure how clearly it will show with the color, but it's just a basic brown. I do believe it is a hand dyed yarn, but it didn't have a label. It came already wound, and all it had was inside the ball. It had a little post-it note that was stuck in there and just had, I think, 4 numbers on it, but no clue as to the maker or um, the the brand of yarn or even the content. But it feels very similar to the other yarn I got, which is this variegated. And this variegated, let's see. I'm not sure how well you can see some of the colors on there, but it's got some really nice browns and blues and yellows and kind of a purpley. So it's really pretty, and it actually goes really well with this. The brown is a bit darker than on the variegated, which actually works out really well because the pattern in some parts, it tends to disappear just a little bit on this one. But this yarn is from Blue Moon Fiber Arts, and it's called Socks That Rock. And you can see it is 100% superwash merino, and the size is lightweight. So I'm not really sure if that meant it was fingering weight or getting closer to a DK weight. I'm not as familiar with yarn, even though I learned how to knit probably when I was 5. It never really was something that I did consistently. I learned when I was 5 while I was staying with my grandmother for about a week. My younger sister was being born, and so my parents were, of course, busy. And so I had to go somewhere to be taken care of. My grandmother was a prolific crafter. So she obviously took that time to keep me busy by teaching me different things. I learned plastic canvas, crochet, and knitting. Those were the main ones. I don't remember she did cross stitch at that time, but the yarn art was most of what I learned how to do at that time. When I first learned to knit, I could not get my tension right. It was way too tight. Um, and because it was so tight, it was a pain. It was not fun to work with. So it wasn't until I was older, probably high school, that I picked it back up again, and it just clicked on what I was reading in the books on how to do knitting, and it became a little bit easier for me, and I was able to understand tension and get a little bit more consistent in my stitching. So all of that to say that I wasn't sure what kind of yarn this is because I just haven't done a whole lot with yarn, but I'm learning a little bit. But with those 2 yarns that I'm working with, here are the socks that I'm making. So I have, this is the leg is done, and I've just turned the heel. So I've gotten the heel flap done, and I've just done all the short rows and picked up the stitches along the side. So now I'll be working on the gusset to start working down the leg of the foot. So I'm pretty excited. The pattern is going well. Um, you can kind of see the pattern a little bit. And what's fun with this yarn, I don't have the greatest lighting here, but what is kind of fun with this yarn is I didn't really notice some of the colors that were in it because it's hard to tell in a variegated sometimes. You just don't notice the yarns or the colors on the threads. But on one side, on this one, I have a kind of a concentration of the purples and pinks in the colored yarns. And then when I flipped my sock around, I had blues and yellows showing up on this side. So it's kind of created a neat effect in that the concentration of the colors have been all together. It'll be interesting to see what happens when I pick up the stitches, which will be the very next step on here, picking up the colors to continue the pattern along the foot. I'll be interested to see what happens. Whatever happens with the color pooling and things like that, I don't care. I just love this sock so far. Problem that I had was in getting gauge. I didn't have any indication, none whatsoever on the brown. And on the colored, I didn't have enough of an indication to let me know what size the yarn was, if it was a 1 or a 2 or a 3. I don't know. I I knew it wasn't a 4, which is a worsted weight. That much I do know. But because I didn't know the size of the yarn, I wasn't sure what kind of needles I should be using, what size. I had been using a cable needle in the past for knitting the socks that I've done in the past, but I wanted to go back and pick up DPNs, the double pointed needles. I just like being able to work with them. They're fun. It's nice to do the cable because when I use cables, I do them 2 at a time. The nice thing with that is that they're done at the same time, so I don't have to struggle with second sock syndrome. That's when you finish one sock and then you can't get the second one started. You've lost your drive to do that. Um, Something interrupts you, so you don't get it done or even started. So I like doing 2 at a time because of that. But this point, I wanted to do double pointed. Um, they just have a different feel to them. So I'm enjoying the sock yarn. I think it's sock yarn. But the problem was because I don't know what the kind of or how thick the yarn is, I couldn't really gauge what needles to use. I did use 2.25 millimeters. I was not getting gauge. The gauge swatch that I made was still too big, but I didn't want to go any smaller. I do have some 2 millimeter, 2.0 millimeter needles, but they're bamboo and they're really thin, and I'm afraid I'm going to snap them. And there would be nothing worse than snapping a needle in the middle of your project. Well, snapping it at all is not an option, but even worse in the middle of a project. So I didn't want to go any smaller than a 2.25. So what I decided to do was just go a size smaller in the socks that I'm making. I have tried these on before I started the heel, and they fit okay around the leg as far as I can tell. They're going to be a little loose, but once I should probably try them on with the heel gusset on it, or just the heel flap on, just to see where they are. Part of the problem with trying them on, once again, is they are on the bamboo needles, and I don't want to snap the needles when I'm trying them on. But I think I can do it carefully if I get enough of the needles in there so that it gives me enough room to get my foot in. So that's what I'm working on. That is my challenge sock for the Sock Bash 2020 in January that the Grocery Girls is hosting on Ravelry. It is the 15th of the month. That means we're halfway through the month, and I don't even have one sock finished. So I'm going to need to pick it up a little bit. Since this is a hobby and a secondary project to my main business, I'm going to have to schedule my time a little bit better, and maybe have more of a concentration when I'm working on my project so that I can try to get faster. I'm not a really fast knitter. Maybe it's time for me to work on picking up the speed. But like I said, I'm nervous with the needles that I'm using because I don't want to snap them. Um, but they are also pretty inexpensive ones. I think they came from China, but I just wanted a set to try some double pointeds. I might eventually start adding into my stash or into my supplies some good metal needles, but that's going to have to be a gradual thing. Since knitting is not my main hobby that I work on, um, I don't want to invest too much in the materials, just because I tend to cycle through on what I like to do. I can't have too many projects going on at the same time because it becomes too overwhelming. So when I'm working on knitting, I'm usually not doing anything with crochet or cross stitch or plastic canvas or um, embroidery, just a myriad of different types of projects. So I'm focusing on knitting this time, but it's one of those things, who knows how long that particular interest will last. I have a feeling it'll probably stick around, but it's one of those things that'll probably go into waves. But so far right now, I'm really having fun, and it's nice to be able to have a small project to take around with me wherever I go. Because a lot of times I find that there is downtime. I just have to be a little bit more focused on getting further along in my project as I'm working on it. So the question is, do you have projects that you take with you or something that you do when you're out and about? Maybe you find that you're at a park waiting for your kids as they're playing, or if you're in a pickup line for school, sometimes those can be kind of a long wait, waiting for the kids to get out of school. Maybe you're in line at the DMV to waiting for your number to be called so you can renew your license and the photo. That's always fun. Or sometimes you just never know where you would be, that you're waiting for something and you have nothing to do. There's really no one to talk to, and might as well bring out a project to work on. Mine right now is knitting. What is it that you like to do when you're waiting? Well, thank you so much for spending some time with me. I do hope you enjoyed getting to know just a little bit about me, and I hope to see you again on the next podcast.